Hey, good morning. It's great to see everyone today. Again, Jim said it's kind of been crazy around here. We actually, it was probably about 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon. I said, one more domino as far as teachers in our kids' ministry, and then the kids were going to be in here because it's just that many people are sick. But it's good to be able to worship together and to study together. So I have a piece of paper here. The staff and I get one of these every week, and we also get an email copy of this. But, we ask for you to share your prayer concerns and praises with us, and we get this little piece of paper. In fact, this week as we were going through, it kind of dawned on me, we had more prayer requests come in this week than we've had since before COVID. And it's interesting because sometimes people are praising and sometimes it's like, hey, pray for my trip and different things. But a lot of times there's a story, and the story's not an easy story. Sometimes it's cancer, and that's the story. Sometimes it's death. Sometimes it's just family stuff or marriage stuff or financial stuff or just stuff. And it's stories that people are allowing us to be part of and to pray for, where really the story is all the same. Life is tough. You don't need me to tell you that, but sometimes life is tough. Sometimes it's difficult to go through this thing called life, and one of the things I want you to know is, as life is tough, you don't have to do this alone, and you're not alone. We have the church, and that's the whole idea of one another plays such an important thing. But I can look at the history of the church and understand that when life is tough, it's been tough for a lot of centuries for Christians. And there are stories and there are examples of people who walked through very, very difficult moments in life. We're actually going to look at a church today that was very well aware that life can be tough. This particular church was not unusual in the fact that it was tough, but it was unique in that Jesus was able to say, I can't find anything you're doing wrong. Now, I've served the church since I was 19 years old. I've yet to come across a church where Jesus would be able to say, there's nothing you're doing wrong. Because we have ourselves that get in the way and different things like that. But in this particular church, in the town of Smyrna, there was a member of this church by the name of Polycarp. That does not mean a lot of fish. But that was Jim's joke, by the way. Have to throw him under the bus. No, anyway. But here's the reality. Polycarp was a servant of Jesus. He eventually became pastor of this church. He actually was thought to be the last person alive that actually served under one of Jesus' original disciples. And he was a direct disciple of the Apostle John, who was the last of Jesus' apostles to die. And so with that, that's kind of a big sort of thing. Now, Polycarp, we're going to tell a little bit of his story after a while, but I want you to kind of put that name in the back of your mind, because what Jesus says to the church of Smyrna, I believe, impacted Polycarp's life in a tremendous way. So we're going to be talking about the town of Smyrna today, and I want to kind of give you a little map of what, so you see Asia Minor here, that's today what is Turkey. Across the sea is Greece, and so on. So look at this a little bit closer. John is on the island of Patmos. He was in Ephesus. That was kind of his home base. He was exiled to Patmos, and he writes the book of Revelation, directed by the Holy Spirit through the visions that he got to see, but he addresses certain churches. The first church is Ephesus. The next church is Smyrna. The next church is going to be Pergamum. And so basically what we find in this example right here is that this was a circuit road. It was a mail route. So basically what we're doing is we're following the book of Revelation as it is being passed to different churches. It's also believed that John, the apostle, kind of had leadership in maybe over the different pastors, different leaders of all of these churches. So these churches are all very, very special to him. Now, one of the things that we find is that Smyrna was actually a Roman city in Turkey. It was a city that was built by the Romans. It was destroyed, rebuilt by the Romans. They said it was a very symmetrical city. Everything was straight. Everything was laid out in very organized fashion. But all of the main roads were lined with pagan temples. Dozens of temples throughout the entire city. But there was one called Golden Street. And Golden Street was this very wide road, long road, that led up the mountain in Smyrna, what today is modern-day Izmir, Turkey, over 1 million people. But that road led, and it went up to the mountain, and on that mountain was the temple to Zeus. So this was an epicenter, as most towns were, of pagan worship. We're also going to talk a little bit about that next week and what kind of came with a lot of that. But being in Smyrna was not easy for Christians. And one of the reasons why it wasn't easy for Christians in Smyrna is one reason was what we're going to call Caesar worship. See, Rome did a lot for the world that it conquered. And for that, people thought Rome was pretty great. One of the things that they did is that they created this elaborate road system. You know, all roads lead to Rome, so on like that. So it was this very sophisticated, very connected road system, and that made life easier. But not only that, there was a thing called Pax Romana. Pax Romana was the peace of Rome. It is actually thought at certain times throughout their particular empire, there were as many as one soldier for every 10 people. So there's one cop for every 10 people. So they kind of tightened the screws a little bit, right? And so with that came peace. A lot of the warring factions of smaller communities and different things like that kind of went away. Crime kind of went away. And people started thinking, Rome's doing a pretty cool thing here. And that kind of led to Rome's pretty great. And so they kind of worshiped the spirit of Rome. And eventually they worshiped the city of Rome. And then eventually they just worshiped the emperor. And at first it was kind of an informal thing where people would say Caesar's a god or Caesar is Lord. And then it became formalized, and after it became formalized, it became mandatory. And here's what mandatory meant. Throughout all the cities throughout the Roman Empire, they would erect these statues to Caesar. And these statues of Caesar would have like this burning incense around it, and you were expected as a citizen or a person to go and grab a pinch of incense and burn that on the altar. And as you burn that on the altar to Caesar, you were to say, Caesar is God and Caesar is Lord. And when you said those words, this is what happened. You got a certificate. We're going to call it an ID. Once a year. That you had to prove that you had sworn allegiance and worship of Caesar. This allowed you to go into the market. This allowed you to buy vegetables. This allowed you to go in and take part in life. And actually, a lot of the things that were going on that particular day, if you were a blacksmith, you had to be in the blacksmith guild. And so and to be part of these trade guilds, you actually had to swear allegiance to Caesar. This was mandatory. Now, one of the things is because this was political, you could also worship other gods. Now, in worshiping other gods, though, this kind of presented a problem for Christians because Christians could not say both Jesus is Lord and Caesar is Lord. And so by virtue of this, it became very difficult for them to live because it ended up in a lot of poverty. Now, it wasn't just the Roman end of things that was difficult. There were Jewish communities in all of these large towns throughout the Roman Empire, and oftentimes the Jewish communities made it equally difficult on Christians. We're going to dive into that here in a moment, but understand this is how this is the context by which Jesus addresses this church. This is what they're walking through. And then it says this in verse 8. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, the words of the first and last, who died and came to life. I love the picture where it says, Jesus' grace, my grace is sufficient for you. And what I happen to believe is that Jesus shows up through his Spirit in how we need him. Sometimes it's power, sometimes it's comfort, sometimes it's discipline. Jesus shows up in the way that we need him. And he shows up here and he says, the first and the last. Now, in the book of Revelation, there's also the phrase, the Alpha and the Omega. Alpha and Omega means first and last, the beginning and end. Jesus, the beginning time, end of time, all at the same time. But when he says here first and last, Jesus is pointing to the fact that he lacks nothing. That he is unlimited in every way. In fact, one of the things that we have to understand when Jesus says, I'm the first and last, is that he is unlimited in power. If we are going to take John at his word from the book of John, in chapter 1 of the book of John, which is the biography of Jesus, he says that is from Jesus himself, as part of the Godhead, that is the agent of creation. What we see, what we do not see, the universe that we live in, all of the universes that are still coming into existence are because of the unlimited power of Jesus. That's a pretty big thing. That's a pretty big idea that Jesus is not limited in power. He is also not limited in knowledge. He has unlimited knowledge. Now, this can be kind of one of those confusing things. And I remember when I was a little kid and I was in Sunday school at the basement of Buckland Christian Church in Buckland, Kansas, it was scary to me to sing the song, "Oh, be careful, little ears, what you hear. Be careful, little mouth, what you say, for the Father up above is looking down below." And it kind of developed this idea that God is the great cosmic killjoy waiting for me to mess up because of his unlimited knowledge. But also with the unlimited knowledge of God also comes something that we're going to find here that's vital here and important, because what Jesus knows. Also, he is unlimited in presence. Again, that can be kind of a scary thing, like Jesus is everywhere and so on like that. But here's the reality. Jesus said that when he left and said, here's the marching orders of the church. I want you to go make disciples and teach them my way of life and what I have told you. Then Jesus says, but surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age. He has promised us through his Spirit a continual presence in our life. That's going to become important as we kind of follow through. But it wasn't just that he was first and last. It also says that he was dead and is now alive. In Revelation chapter 1, verse 18, Jesus says, I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore. And it's from that unlimited power that Jesus is able to say that. But with what he comes up with next as he begins to speak into the life of the church, it comes from his unlimited knowledge of what's happening in their life. Now notice verse 9, it says, I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. So I think about this. One of the things that Jesus is saying here is like, listen, I know some things because of my unlimited knowledge. I know some things. One of the things that I know is that I know your trials. I know what you're walking through. I know the difficulty of life. I know the insecurities. I know the regret. I know the poor decisions. I know what you're going through right now. But with that, Jesus is able to say, listen, I know life isn't great right now. And I know that. I'm aware of that. And one of the beautiful things we're going to see here is Jesus in the middle of it. It's not like he's off somewhere ambivalent to what they're going through. It's like, I know your trials, but he also understands that their trials and their poverty are closely connected. And the poverty comes because they refuse to say Caesar is Lord. Because they said Jesus is Lord, they refuse to say Caesar is Lord. And by virtue of that, that means you can't go to the grocery store. That means you can't trade, you can't get a job. There's all types of things that are cants in your life because you said, my loyalty is to Jesus. So there was the social pressure, and a lot of people with the social pressure were saying, you know what, it's just a little incense. Just say it and don't mean it. But they refused to do that. So there was the social pressure, there was the political pressure, but on the other end of things were the Jewish community. And the Jewish community of all people should have been compassionate toward the Christians. Because you see, the Jewish people, they made an agreement with Rome. Kind of one of those that they made an agreement with Rome to say, we're going to not say Caesar is Lord, but we're going to make sure that everything is calm, and we'll toe the line otherwise. Just don't make us do that. And so they got a free pass, but yet they made it difficult for Christians who were unwilling to compromise. And one of the things that was happening, the Romans were already calling Christians atheists. And one of the reasons why they were calling Christians atheists is because, catch this, they only worshiped one God. And because they only worshiped one God, they were just considered weird, and how can you only worship one God? There were some other things that the Jews were actually kind of planting into the minds of the people in the community, the larger community. They accused Christians of being cannibals because of communion, because of eating the body and drinking the blood. They said, these people are weird. Then they accused them of dividing families, and by dividing families, because when a person became a Christian, sometimes they had to leave family and realize they didn't have the blessing of family, protection of family. The Jewish people would say, you know, they're threatening the peace of Rome. They were also considered to be immoral. One of the reasons why they were considered to be immoral, Jews were planning the idea that they have this weird holy kiss. And you always read that, greet each other with the holy kiss. I don't know what the holy kiss was. Just glad it's not around anymore. Honestly, I'm not a hugger, not one of those guys that's like, hey, this is cool. Certainly glad that we don't have to greet each other with a holy kiss, especially during cold and flu season like we're in right now. Right? So, in fact, there was actually a church that posted that they're going to do fist bump February with all the germiness and stuff like that going along. I was like, that's kind of a cool idea. So, anyway, they were also accused of being politically disloyal because they would not express their loyalty to Caesar. And Jesus saying what the Jews were doing, they call themselves Jews, but they're a synagogue of Satan. That's pretty strong words, and I'm going to let Jesus handle those words. But one of the things that I think Jesus is saying, I'm going to get back to the synagogue of Satan here in a moment, but I think what Jesus is saying is like, I know your trials, I know this, I know this. I know you, and I see you. I don't know what you're walking through right now, what challenges you have. Jesus is aware of everything that you're walking through. He's aware of the pain. He's aware of the doubt. He's aware of the internal conflict that is happening inside of you. And Jesus sees you and knows you. But there's one other thing that he does know. He knows the enemy. He knows who your enemy is. And this is equal opportunity. I'm going to make everybody uncomfortable here today. If you're a Republican here today, I'm going to tell you that Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden are not your enemy. And if you're a Democrat, Mitch McConnell, Donald Trump, Rand Paul, whomever it is, not your enemy. If you're having marriage trouble right now, your spouse is not your enemy. You're having job trouble, your boss is not your enemy. You're having trouble with a friend or neighbor, whomever it might be, they are not your enemy. The enemy is Satan. And Satan does everything that he possibly can to destroy the created order. And the greatest created order that God said it is very good is people. He desires to destroy people. And he will stop at nothing to do that. And so Jesus takes his unlimited knowledge and is able to say, I can speak in to what's going on in your life. But then he goes out, listen, I can tell you what to expect. I can tell you what's going to happen. So notice verse 10. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. So Jesus says, listen, I know you, I know what you're walking through, but I also want to let you know what's about to happen. And one of the things that Jesus is very clear about is you're going to suffer. Now, there is a very dangerous theology that happens in this world. It's called prosperity theology. And one of the dangers of prosperity theology is basically to say, if anything bad happens to you, you are doing something wrong. Now, Jesus says quite the opposite. You are going to suffer. In John chapter 16, he says, listen, in this life, you're going to have trouble. So when life is difficult, when life is tough, when life has trouble, it should not surprise us at all. It's in the midst of trouble that we get the unlimited presence of Jesus. You see, Jesus doesn't promise that we will be free from trouble, free from trial, but that He will be with us through it. That He will walk with us through the trials that we have. I love Psalm 23. I believe that Psalm 23 needs to be taught in the church more than preached at funerals. I love the whole idea, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, God didn't say, I'll see you on the other side. No, it says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The idea here is that God is with us through His presence, through His Spirit in the midst of our trials. And so with that, one of the things that we have to understand is it's not going to be easy. In fact, a very wise man once said in a sermon here in this church, his name is Jim. And I don't remember everything Jim says. I'm sorry, Jim. I don't remember everything he says, but this one stuck with me. Following Jesus isn't easy, but it's worth it. And here's the worth it. Here's the worth it, and it's this: be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Victory is certain. That's one of the things that I think we could sit here and say is victory is certain. When we hear about the crown of life, I'm going to tell you, it was this week that was like, I'd never really realized that before. I used to be that guy that said, well, if I have to deal with this person, if I have to deal with this situation, I need an extra jewel in my crown when I get to heaven. You ever heard somebody say that? So we're all thinking like the kingly crown, and it's going to have all these jewels in it and different things. But that's not the crown that they're actually talking about here. I showed you that picture. This is Turkey, and over the pond or over the sea is Greece, and they would have understood the terminology of athletics and Olympics and different things like that. And to the victor goes the crown. They didn't get a medal. They didn't get a trophy. If you won, if you were victorious, you got that little wreath that they would stick in your head. That was the crown that you would be given. And what Jesus is saying here is, faithful unto the point of death, and you will receive the crown of life. You will receive victory. Now, we're in the book of Revelation right now, and let me just tell you that I've got a standard answer when it comes to the book of Revelation. If you ask me, what is this right here? I don't know. What about this right here? I don't know. What about this over here? I don't know. Now, there's a lot of people who are a lot smarter than me that will say, this is this, and this is this, and this is this. But as many people are in this room here today, there are probably that many different views and opinions on a lot of the stuff in the book of Revelation. But a big read of the book of Revelation is very clear. Jesus wins. Jesus is victorious. I've read, actually in prep for this series, I read it last week, and again, I finished a chronological thing through the Bible last year, and I didn't get it done in a year. I got it done in a year and a week, so sorry. But here's how the latter chapters of the book of Revelation talks about the gathering of the nations and this big war that's about ready to happen. And Jesus shows up and it's over. It's just like done. No explanation. No, this happened and this happened. Jesus comes and is like, I'm here. It's over. Jesus wins. And Jesus has promised us his victory. He has promised us the crown of life. Now with this, there are the words, unto death. There are a number of people that will have to die because of their faith in Jesus. I actually read this week that there was a number of people in Nigeria that were killed because they were faithful to Jesus, just this week. Every year there's stories of people who, because of their faith in Jesus, they refuse to bend their knee to whomever or whatever. Because Jesus is Lord of their life, they refuse to compromise. And they lose their life. Now, the vast majority of Christians who have ever walked this earth, it was not an unto death sort of thing. It's been until death. That they were faithful over the long haul through the many years. In fact, when you look at what Jesus is saying to the church, the promise, the encouragement here, I believe he is speaking into that. In fact, in verse 11, he says, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit of the churches, what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers will not be hurt by second death. Second death refers to the lake of fire and brimstone in the book of Revelation. This is hell. And I think what Jesus is saying is, don't fear first death. No matter what that death may be like, do not fear first death. The reality is, unless Jesus returns, we will all face first death. But he says, listen, if you're faithful to me, if you walk with me, if, like we say, got to be on the right side of history, you got to be the right side of eternity here, and that's on the side of Jesus. And if you're on Jesus' side, we don't have to worry about hell. We don't have to be concerned about second death. And it's not like Jesus has just saved us for, he has also saved us from. He has saved us for eternity with him, but from the death and punishment of hell. And so I believe his message to the church is one that we need today. And the message to the church, and this is our bottom line, continue to remain faithful. Continue to remain faithful to Jesus regardless. And I'm just going to stop it there, because that can mean trial. That can mean illness. That can mean divorce. That can mean family stuff. That can mean financial ruin. It can mean any number of things. But this is what I am certain of here today, that until you die or Jesus returns, the schemes of Satan will be very real in your life. And he will be relentless. Now, one of the things that we have to say is he does not have the power of Jesus. He does not have the knowledge of Jesus. But he is an evil, evil spiritual being that will do everything he can to destroy God's precious ones who are the Christ followers. He will do everything he can to destroy, and he will not be fair. I love the movie Pirates of the Caribbean, where Jack Sparrow and Will Turner are in the blacksmith shop, and they are fighting, and they were swashbuckling back and forth with the swords and so on. And Jack Sparrow does something that Will Turner considers to be unfair, and he looks at Jack Sparrow and says, "That's not fair." And Jack Sparrow responds with, "Pirate." And we could look at Satan and go, "Well, that's not fair." And Satan's going to go, "Satan," right? He's not going to fight fair. He's going to do everything at his disposal to destroy Christians. But Jesus says those that are faithful even to the point of death will be given the crown of life. So I mentioned I mentioned Polycarp. Polycarp was 86 years old. He is a pastor of a church. He's a leader in the church. He had served under John. He invariably had read the book of Revelation. I don't know how many times over the last 60 years these churches passed around letters to say, this is good stuff. Let us learn from this. But the beautiful thing is that Polycarp didn't just say Jesus is Lord. His actions lived up to that. See, one afternoon he was at home. He was in an upper room resting when an army troop of Roman soldiers showed up. Full army gear, everything, dozens of them to arrest one old man. Some of his friends actually tried to talk him into trying to escape, but the teaching of the church is you didn't look for martyrdom, you didn't look for persecution, but you also didn't flee from it. And he just simply said, if God wills it. So as his captors came, he actually invited them in. Actually said, hey, let me get you some food. Let me get you something to drink. He said, I just asked that I'll go. Just let me pray for an hour. An hour became 2. And as the soldiers heard Polycarp pray, they began to question, is this something we should even be doing in the first place? Have we done the wrong thing? So he agreed to go with them and ended up going before the proconsul in the arena where, well, they slaughtered people. And the proconsul pled with him, curse Christ, and I will release you. And his reply was, 86 years I have served him. He had never done me wrong. How then can I blaspheme my king who saved me? He reached out another way. He says, do this, old man. Just swear by the genius of the emperor, and that will be sufficient. That was kind of like saying, he's not necessarily Lord, but he's pretty cool and all. And Polycarp replied, if you imagine for a moment that I would do that, then I think you pretend that you don't know who I am. Hear it plainly. I am a Christian. Proconsul then threatened him with wild beasts. And Polycarp said, bring them forth. I would change my mind if it meant going from worse to the better, but not change from the right to the wrong. Then the proconsul said, I will have you burned alive. And his response was, you threaten fire that burns for an hour and is over, but the judgment of the ungodly is forever. And then they prepared the fire. And Polycarp lifted his eyes to heaven and he prayed this. Father, I bless you that you have deemed me worthy of this day and hour, that I might take a portion of the martyrs in the cup of Christ. Among these may I today be welcomed before your face as a rich and acceptable sacrifice. And then they lit the fire. The Christians who were there said that it didn't smell like burned flesh, but rather bread baking. And one of the soldiers eventually stuck a dagger in his heart, and he died. In Hebrews chapter 11, there's a verse that they're talking about all these giants of faith, all these heroes of faith, and the writer of Hebrews says, the world was not worthy of them. Their life, their sacrifice, their commitment to Jesus, the world is not worthy of them. The world was not worthy of Polycarp. A few verses later, the writer of Hebrews says these words, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, those witnesses who had stood the test, who had remained faithful. There's a picture I have in my mind. It's probably not the actual picture, but there are those who have gone before us, that if we could peer into heaven, if they could peer down below, they would be cheering for us, because they know that it's worth it. So my prayer is that those who come behind us find us faithful. Join me in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you. Thank you for men like Polycarp, women like Polycarp, men like John, women like John, who were faithful to the end, whatever that end might be. And Father, I thank you that Jesus came that we might not have to worry, be concerned at all about second death. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.